Hello, eighth graders. How are you guys doing today? Let's see. Last time we got together, we were talking about how Luke is a book primarily written to the poor and to the Gentiles. So that Luke's gospel was not so much written for the Jewish people as for the non-Jewish people, people like you and me, which is why the Jewish why this book is one of the favorites in the now, because it's, well, they're all favorites. Everybody loves them all. But Luke is especially relevant to us because he explains things that we wouldn't know otherwise. So, one of the things that Luke does really, really well is Luke loves to tell his stories. He likes everything to be a narrative, right? So, Luke is more narrative than probably the other Gospels. Um, makes it really easy for you and me to understand because we understand stories really well, and that's exactly the way Luke writes. So as we're hearing the stories, we're going to know those stories really, really well. So today, what I'd like to do is I'd like to spend a little bit of time kind of taking a look at one of these stories. Now, I'm going to warn you, while we're looking specifically at the Gospel of Luke, for what we're going to talk about today, I'm going to be using some Matthew too. So I'm going to be flipping back and forth a little bit between the Gospels of Luke and the Gospels of Matthew, because I want to make sure you know all of these stories. But the story I want to start out with is the story of Christmas. Now, Christmas. What is Christmas? Well, let's look at the word. Christmas we spell it, it's spelled Christ, Christ, Mass, Mas. So it's a special Mass, that's a church service, in which we honor Christ, who is Jesus, right? So this is a very special honoring of Christ. Now, every church service is about Jesus, of course, and every single thing we do is about him. But this Mass is especially about him. How? Well, Christmas is the day we celebrate his birth, right? So this is, for lack of a better term, this is the birthday of Jesus, is what we're celebrating on Christmas. So chances are, you living in our country, in our place, you probably have heard of Christmas before. I certainly hope so. And perhaps you even celebrate Christmas at your own homes. Maybe for you, Christmas is a day that you especially remember all the wonderful things Jesus has done for us. Or maybe it's a day where you just celebrate family, and you don't really think about the religious connotations of it. But it's a religious holiday through and through because it's all about Jesus's birth. Yeah. So what I'd like to do today is kind of spend a little bit of time and make sure you know the story of Jesus's birth. We call this story the nativity story. Natus, which is a baby. So it's the birthing story, the story of Jesus's birth. And here's how it happened. First, you have to know kind of where Mary and Joseph were at. Now, Mary and Joseph, Joseph was an older man, and Mary was young, and Mary and Joseph were looking to get married, right? But it wasn't a romantic kind of marriage. Not all marriages are romance marriages. I know they are. Most marriages in our modern times are, but there were other kinds of marriage and throughout history. And Joseph and Mary were entering into a special kind of marriage, in which was about living a religious life, right? It's kind of like if you imagine a monk or a nun, that right now what they would do is they'd enter into a family, into an order. It's kind of like that. So the special kind of marriage that they were going to have was one that was designed for them to take care of each other, but it was a very holy marriage, right? And then something happened. An angel came to Mary while they were betrothed. So that's like they're married, but not quite married yet. Like they don't live together yet, but they're married, right? So it's kind of like a betrothal is kind of like it's like married part one, and then they have married part two. So there's two ceremonies. For us, we only have one ceremony. It's kind of like being engaged, but way more serious than that. So Mary and Joseph are engaged, but way more serious than that. And an angel comes to speak to Mary. And Mary is very shocked. Why is an angel talking to me? And the angel says, Hail, full of grace, the Lord is with you. And Mary's like, why is an angel talking to me like this? Why is an angel here? And an angel tells her, don't worry. You have found favor with God. God has chosen you to be the bearer of his son. That you will bring God into the world through your womb. And Mary says, how can this be? I'm supposed to be entering into this to a marriage, and this kind of marriage, I don't have any relations with a man. And the angel says, the Holy Spirit will come over you, will overshadow you. Therefore, the child that will be born will be called Son of the God. And Mary says, okay, let it be done to me as you say. Think about that for a minute. Mary was a very religious girl, and so she knew the Bible really well. She read all the prophets and all the stories. She knows that very often when religious things happen, when God really works in somebody's life, that it's not easy, that it's really hard, that scary things happen, and it's not quiet and simple. And yet Mary said yes. Mary must have been a very brave woman. Very, very brave. Because I don't know about you, but I would be terrified. Well, when Joseph finds out that Mary is pregnant, that bad stuff starts to happen. Because Joseph thought he was marrying a good girl, and now that good girl is pregnant, and it's not from him. So he's thinking maybe Mary cheated on him, which is a terrible thing to have to think, but what else is he supposed to think? Well, maybe an angel came and talked to her? No, that's not what anybody would think. And so he was going to divorce her quietly. When the angel came to Joseph and said, Joseph, don't be afraid to take Mary as your wife, for the child to be born is to be the Son of God. And Joseph, you can almost see his eyes light up. He's like, oh, she is even holier than I thought she was. And so they get married. And Joseph takes care of this child as if it's his own, right? He's God's stepfather or foster father would be a better way of thinking about it, right? And so he takes care of him. Now, while she's still pregnant, something happens. There is the Roman government calls for a census. Now, what this means is that everybody's got to be counted. We're going to count all the people and see how many people we have so we know how much to tax them. And so, of course, they've got to go back to their home city. They can't be they've got to go be counted in the right place. So they have to go all the way. It's a long journey, all the way to Bethlehem from Nazareth, where they live. And they get to Bethlehem. You can just imagine they had to walk or ride a donkey or something. It was just a hard journey for a pregnant woman who's almost about to have a baby. And they get there, and Joseph is really worried because Mary's looking like she's going into labor, like she's ready to have this baby. And they're in a strange town that they don't really know terribly well. It's their hometown where they're from, but they didn't grow up there. They're from Nazareth, right? So they're trying to find a place for her to stay, and they're trying to go to like an inn or find somebody's house who will let them in, and nobody has room for them because everybody's come in because of the census. There's so many people there that there's no more extra room. And so they're banging on doors. They're banging on taverns and houses and inns, and they can't find a place to stay. And Mary is about to have this baby in the street. They've got nothing. They're poor. They're alone in a strange place, and she's about to have a baby. And finally, this one innkeeper looks and sees what's going on, and he has compassion on them. He says, I'll tell you what, just outside of town, a little ways. Not, I mean, like just right over there. I've got a little cave we use as a barn, and you go there, and you can have the baby there. All right. And so they go there, and sure enough, they do. They have the baby, and Jesus is born in this little cave. From two, think about it for a moment. I mean, the God of the universe, God Himself, wasn't born in a palace, but in a little cave on the outside of town. How amazing. And yet at the same time that this poor little couple in this nowhere town is having this baby in some cave, a star appears above that cave. Now it had been there for a while. They didn't know this. But people from there were magi, great wise men who saw the star rising and realized something great was happening because of the way it was rising, and they knew the stars really well. And so they traveled thousands of miles to come here. And just the day that Jesus happens to be there, out of nowhere, the star brings them right to that cave. And so you can imagine this poor couple sitting there with a baby. They've had to put the baby in a manger. That's a feeding trough for the cows, right? They had to put the baby in a manger because they didn't have like a crib. And yet suddenly are surrounded by kings who've traveled thousands of miles to meet this boy. It's an incredible thing. And at the same time, off in the fields, an angel appears to the shepherds. See, shepherds were all around Bethlehem, right? They were keeping the sheep, and shepherds kind of lived out in the fields. They were dirty, poor people, right? Very, very poor, very, very dirty, sleeping in the fields with nothing more than a blanket. And that's like their whole life, them and sheep. And suddenly an angel appears and tells them that the Son of God has been born, and that you'll know it's him when you see a baby lying in a manger. You'd never see that. But if you see that, then you know that this is the Son of God. And so all these sheep go into Bethlehem looking around until they find it. And they find this cave, and sure enough, there's a baby lying in a manger. And there's all these kings around. And all the shepherds fall to their knees and can't believe what they're seeing. That this they tell them we saw an angel, and the angel told us to come here and that we would see the Son of God lying in a manger. So the rich, the rest of the world is invited. The poor are invited. Everybody is coming around from just out of the woodwork to see this incredible event happen in a cave in some nowhere town outside of just way out there in the middle of nowhere. And this is how Jesus was born. There was a problem, though. And the problem was this, that when Jesus was born, all these wise men were coming from all over the place. And so the king in the area, the king of Judea, his name was Herod, he found out that this boy was being born. And he had his people go look through the Old Testament to try to understand where the Son of God was supposed to be born. And they figured it out. They figured out it was Bethlehem. And so this Herod really wanted to protect his kingdom. He didn't want there to be another king. So he did a terrible thing. He ordered guards to come into Bethlehem and kill every child that was under the age of 2, hoping that he would be able to kill off this Son of God, this new King of Kings. Now, Joseph, the angel came and warned Joseph in a dream. And so Joseph went, and they left before the soldiers got there, but many, many children died at the hands of Herod. And so Joseph took them. He knew, because Herod wanted him dead, that he couldn't go back home. And so he took him to Egypt. And Jesus' first years, they lived as refugees in a foreign nation. Imagine that for a minute. If you were God, If you had all the power in the universe to do anything you wanted, you could do anything at all, and you were going to choose to live a human life, what kind of human life would you choose? Would you choose to be a rock star? Would you choose to be rich? Would you choose to grow up on a Caribbean island and get coconuts every day? Would you choose to grow up on a farm? Would you choose to grow up in a mansion? Well, God had that choice. He could choose any kind of life he wanted to have. And he chose the life of the poor. He chose to be poor and not terribly significant. He chose to be born in a no-name town. He chose to live as a refugee. He chose the lowest kind of life that we could ask for. This is the kind of life that Jesus chose to live. Now, you and I, we don't get to choose. We're just given the life we're given and we're just here. But Jesus could. And that's what he chose. And I think that tells us something more than just about anything else that we could learn from the Nativity. That we, you and I, are called to be humble. That we're called to live simple lives. That there's beauty in living a simple life. That we don't have to be famous, even though the world loves famous people. And we don't have to be powerful, even though the world seems to love powerful people. And we don't have to be rich, even though the world seems to love rich people. No, the most beautiful things are available to all of us. And maybe, just maybe, even being poor and small can have some wonderful value that we might not always see. Well, God saw it, and that's the kind of life he chose. So maybe if we're wise, we'll be happy with what we have as well. Well, I hope you enjoy the story of Christmas. I bet you've heard it before. If not, then now you've heard it, and that's great. And that's the way Luke is. Luke just tells stories, and he goes through them one by one, and does a great job of it. So if you ever want to kind of listen to the story of Jesus, I recommend Luke. He's wonderful. Other than that, I hope that you guys have a beautiful week, and I look forward to seeing you next week. God bless. Bye.